Hey, everybody, this is Kenny. Welcome back to another edition of the Leading from the Middle podcast. This is a podcast for middle managers who want to develop themselves, develop their teams, and improve their results. I had dynamic leadership coach Chris Dubois join me the other day, and Chris just dropped some crazy knowledge on us about several things. So, leaders, how do you just build that solid foundation for your team? How do you align everybody with your goals and the goals of the company? What are some mistakes typically that Chris is seeing these days that leaders make? What exactly is dynamic leadership? Because that's something that you really need to survive today. Chris talked about so much more: awareness, communication, and trust. Wait till you hear his take on those three items. You don't want to miss a second of this. Let's get at it.
This episode is brought to you by Kitcaster. Kitcaster books you on top podcasts. How do funded startup founders attract prospects and talent? Podcast interviews. How do entrepreneurs with exits find new deals? Podcast interviews. How do C-suite execs differentiate in crowded markets? Podcast interviews. Kitcaster books you on top podcasts. Click the link in the show notes for a special offer. Celebrate good conversation.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of the Leading from the Middle podcast. I have got a terrific leader with me today that is going to drop some crazy knowledge on all of you out there. So lean in and listen in for this next 25 minutes, half hour or so. I want to introduce dynamic leadership coach Chris Dubois onto the podcast today. Chris, it is so great to have you on. How you doing, sir?
Yeah, I am outstanding. And with that intro, I'm feeling even better. So thank you for having me, Kenny.
You have such a unique background, and there are some really steps that I want the audience to find out about, that I'd love to find out about, that you've taken to now be pouring back in your experience to others. And so I want to give you plenty of time and space. Tell us a little bit about your backstory and what's led you to do what you're doing now.
Yeah. So I had, I guess, let's go way back, right? So starting in high school, I decided at some point that I was just going to work really hard and pay for college out of pocket. And after my freshman year of college and working 5 jobs, everything, I was cleaning out my room, my parents to move out. And I found a note from 6th grade that said, "You're going to, be a soldier. You're going to go do ROTC." And so that week I enlisted.
Wow.
And because I think I was just tired working 5 jobs. I wouldn't recommend that for anyone. But so I enlisted into the Army Reserve, and I finished college doing ROTC, and I commissioned as an infantry officer. And that was a lot of fun, because then I got to go off to Alaska for my first duty station, which is somewhere you'd never expect to live. And when I was there, I got to experience everything, just hardship of, having to do all of our training and everything in the cold, right? And like, you have all these different adverse conditions that you're trying to work through, while at the same time being a 22-year-old who just got shoved into this organization where I'm responsible for 36 men and, $13.8 million worth of equipment.
Wow.
And I like to joke like that some taxpayer right now would just cringe because they heard that, like, oh, you just got out of college and got that responsibility.
We put you in charge. Yeah.
But that dynamic was a lot of fun, because like they always pair you up with, your enlisted counterpart. So I was, I had less than a year as an officer, but I had a guy who was with me who had been in for 12 years. And like, he's kind of my coach and my guide and stuff. And we're working together, and I have to be the one making the decisions, but I got his ear and his guidance to help me do all of this. But I ended up doing really well as a platoon leader, and my battalion commander said, "Hey, I want to pull you up here to work with me so I can kind of coach you and guide you and show you some of this other stuff." And so I got to see that organization from a completely different perspective. I went from, being very focused on my small unit to now seeing all of these units. And so I started noticing certain trends, and it was really with the leaders of the organizations, because generally you're there for a year in a command position, and then you're finding a new job. So someone else is coming in. Mm-hmm. And so I got to see, some leaders, they could come in and they would just take it all in, and then they just hit the ground running. And it was awesome. They were doing everything, that you would expect like a great leader to do. Then there were others that were coming in, and it's like they showed up and said, hey, this is how I run everything, and they expected everyone else to change to them, which obviously didn't work, right? I think we all know like that's never a great idea.
Wow.
But so I started piecing together just this concept of dynamic leadership and how you show up and you take all of these different variables and then figure out how you can change. Because the one thing you can actually do is like change yourself, right? And you're never going to have the same team. You're never going to have the same mission. Right? The situation is going to be completely different when you go somewhere else. And so I started just leaning into that. And as I started moving on in my military career, I kept seeing, these things playing out. And I started really like leaning into this and coaching some of my peers and coaching as I went up in ranks. I started coaching people below me on just, this is how you do it. Wow. Then I want to say it was like 2019. I finally left the military, or I left active duty. I'm still in the Army Reserve now. And which is awesome too, because now I get to keep that military side where I'm learning all this stuff, where I'm a major, but I just stepped down from filling in as a battalion commander, which is a much higher responsibility. But it's like, it's awesome because now I get all this experience to be able to like help other people, grow. But I went into a marketing company. I have no marketing experience at all. I have a degree in English, and I did that because I'm good at reading and writing. It was probably a cop out. But as I joined this marketing company, I started just devouring everything I could find. I just love it. It was fascinating. And then within 9 months, it became pretty clear that my leadership skills were something that would be handy. And so I stepped up to become the head of operations. And then 3 years later, I became CEO of the company.
Wow.
And so I started to, I have my own team now that I'm working with, and I'm growing and I'm hiring and I'm firing and I'm doing all the things that you don't necessarily get to do in the Army, right? You get handed soldiers and you're told, make it work. And so, okay, I'm going to make it work. Hopefully these guys are, they're able to write with more than crayons, and you can get through that. But so I also got to work with a lot of startup, founders and marketers and everything. And I got to learn just so much more of the business. I loved it. And so on the side, I started helping some of these startup founders with leadership stuff. Hey, you're growing your team. Have you tried this? Have you, that's your problem? Like, oh, that's super easy. Check it out. And we start talking, and then they just come back to me like, hey, I was able to, get through this constraint. Our business blew up. Thank you so much. Man, I could probably do this. Like, cause I love doing this. I love talking leadership. I'm going to leave our conversation just feeling high because like we get to talk leadership for 30 minutes, and it's like, why would we not want to do that?
Yeah.
But so now I recently stepped down as CEO of that company so that I could just build my own, venture. And now I'm working as a leadership coach consultant. I'm having a blast talking to people, helping my clients grow their companies, not be that constraint in their business. And it's a lot of fun. So yeah, hopefully I can drop some knowledge bombs today, and we can keep it going.
Wow, what an amazing journey, and so many lessons it sounds like along the way. And I love how you were so observant at such a young age, watching other leaders come in, and you're saying to yourself, well, yeah, a couple of them I love how they took charge, a couple of them not so much. And so I want to stay on that lane because you talked about you briefly mentioned dynamic leadership. What's that definition look and feel like, Chris? And why is that so important for leaders out there today?
Yeah, so the dynamic aspect is the ability to step into any situation and become the leader that you need to be in order for the team to be successful. And so I really focus on 3 foundational skills, which is awareness, communication, and trust. If you as a leader can work through and you can just actually step into any of those situations that you're going to be faced with, and have the awareness to know what's going on around you, who are you working with, right? What's your team doing? How are you even showing up, right? If you can know your tendencies for like, well, I have a quick temper. If this happens, it's like knowing that can go a long way.
Yeah.
And knowing how to communicate with your team or with a client or with, anyway, that government agency that just sent you a letter, not speaking from experience with clients, but
of course not.
And then just building trust, right? Like how do you establish a culture within your organization of one that people actually want to be part of, and they want to share the best ideas, and they want to help bring each other up and do this as a team. If you can really awareness, communication, trust, I call it the ACT framework. if you can follow and really lean into those, like almost every situation or every problem in a situation kind of melts away.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. Awareness, communication, trust. That is so awesome. And I want to ask you this, because I think what you said is so universal there, but they're so very specific and unique and definitely drivers for success. I talk to a lot of leaders that say, I have one leadership style and this is going to be my style all the time. But you mentioned how fast your teams change, and even out in the marketing world, how fast your team changed. And the difference was you were able to pick them. Should leaders grab a leadership style, or I love your three that seems to cover no matter what
Yeah.
situation you're in? What's your thoughts on leadership styles?
So I think it's important to know your leadership tendencies,
Oh,
right?
I love that.
It is fully possible to become like, say, hey, I can't work for someone. I'm going to go build my own company. And you go off and you do your thing, and you only find people to work for you that you want to work for you. You can
Yeah.
do that. You can build a team around you, or even assemble the team rather, right? Of just people that are going to work the way you want them to work.
Hmm.
And so if you're someone who's coming in, you're very like, no, I want this done a very specific way. And when we're talking startup founders, right? Generally, the reason you even start a company is because you have a very specific way you do it that you believe is better than other ways, or it's at least different enough that you want to start the company. And so that's actually pretty normal for a company founder to say, like, I just want these people. I can crush it if I have these people on my team.
Hmm.
But not always going to be the case, especially if you're getting hired into a company and given, a team to manage. Something you might be able to make future hiring, firing decisions. Like right now, you got to work with what you got.
Hmm.
And so one of the exercises I do with my clients, we call it the leader's marks. And so it's 10 different tendencies that you're naturally going to do different things, right? If I'm approaching a situation, generally I'm going to transmit more than I receive. But that doesn't mean that's always the right answer. Sometimes I might need to step into a situation and I know my team has more information than me on this. So I need to be in receive mode. You guys tell me everything that we need right now so that I can make it happen for you.
Hmm.
Right. I could go into, depending on maybe how much time we have in this situation, when we look at the level of risk assumption that we're willing to take, right? Should I be cautious or aggressive? Because if we don't have a lot of time, I might need to be really aggressive here versus, hey, this is not a this month decision. We can be cautious. We can take our time because this is going to be an important one.
Hmm.
And so what we do, we have these all listed out, nice little pretty worksheet, and we put an X after a situation happens, right? We say, okay, this is what happened. This is what we're trying to make happen. And we put X's on each of these different tendencies. We say, this is where we're at. This is how we showed up. Now, how did it work? Usually if we're doing the exercise, it's because it didn't go well.
Yeah.
And so we talk through it, right? We figure out like, okay, what should we have done in order to get that desired end result? We take a different color marker and we mark where we should have been on each of these tendencies. So maybe I can see, on this spectrum of communication, they're like, I was way on the transmission side and I should have been receiving.
Wow.
And you can visually see it, and now you know it. And so the next time a situation similar to that pops up with a similar team, right, we go in more aware, saying, oh, I know how to handle this because I've done it before. I was deliberate in how I approach the situation this time, and how I even did my after action review last time. And so you can just show up way better. And the simple act of going through this exercise makes you more aware of those 10 traits in all things you're doing. And so now, even if it's the first time you've seen a given situation, right, I might be going in and saying, okay, do I need to, for influence, do I need to command more or control more right now? And just by asking yourself that question, you're becoming more aware. And so again, going back to that foundational skill of just building awareness, right?
Yeah.
We're doing it through the activities. So
Yeah. Wow. That makes so much sense to me. And I think what you're saying is really to be resilient, to be flexible in your style, but coming back to your core, those three core values that you have, I think is such a key. I loved all that. Let me ask you about, because you break down what really makes successful teams and organizations. You talk about solid foundations. Tell us a little bit about that.
So again, stems back to the awareness, communication, trust. It just bleeds into everything. With as a leader, right? Just having that awareness is going to let you actually build that foundation. Being able to communicate and get your point across so that you can better align your team. Awesome. when we're talking about setting up a foundation within a company and stuff, or like a team or large organizations, we want to really focus in on the culture of that organization. The one thing that a leader truly owns is the culture. No one else can step in and take control of that.
Yes.
Because the leader is the one at the top. So they are the standard bearer. And so they choose, do I hire this person even though they can't meet the mark that we have set? Right. I really like Seth Godin's definition of culture, which is people like us do things like this. And so when someone comes in, right, are you a person like us who is going to live up to this standard? Because the second that you keep someone in the company that's not at that standard, right, breeds animosity, resentment, all of these bad things within everyone else on the team, because they're seeing this. They're seeing that, hey, we are the type of people who are going to live up to the standard, but this one person is being allowed to live down here. And so it makes it much harder to do it. And so as a leader, you have the culture, which is the ideal. And then the state that your organization is currently in is, I would consider, the climate. And now the difference between your culture and climate is a culture gap. You want those to be as small as possible. Because if you can, that means you're closer to the ideal, right? And you never move the ideal culture. You only move the climate.
Yeah.
And you do things like, right, you ask questions, you talk to your team, you make sure people are calling you out when you're doing something that influences the culture negatively. And it makes it way easier for your entire team to actually show up and be ready to go and, be more positive.
Yeah. I love everything you said. I was thinking of, I know there's been times in companies or even districts where they're not doing that well, but you have one or two stores or departments that are doing extremely well. And I think it's exactly what you talked about. That leaders built that culture, that no matter what, we're going to do our thing. And this is what people like us do. Can you do this? I love that. How do you align all the goals? How do you get everybody on the same page and have the goals aligned?
Yeah. So that is one of the the biggest puzzles to unlock within every organization. The exercise that I have found to be the most helpful is to, one, get really clear on what that ultimate goal is. What do we want? Clarity is like one of those critical things in everything you're doing in life, right? If you can find a way to increase clarity, no matter what you're doing, if you are writing a blog post, if you are, building a landing page for your website, if you are giving your team instructions for a project, the more clarity you provide, like the better that is going to go, because you're now managing expectations on a much more clear level. So start there, right, for alignment. Hey, we got to get hyper clear on what we're trying to do. Then you got to prioritize. And priority is a fun word because it only became plural in like the 1900s, right? Just by nature, if you have two priorities, you don't have a priority. And so you need to be able to say nothing else matters until we achieve this. And now each team, you can have subsets of teams, right, that are all working on their own thing. Generally, those should contribute to the bigger picture. And so setting, OKRs, just other targets like the KPIs that you want to look at, having your dashboards to be able to see, what should I be focusing on? Those are all super important. But really, it comes down to just everyone seeing what we're trying to accomplish and then knowing how their bits fit into that bigger mission that we're working towards. And I think generally that gets everyone pretty well aligned. So
that's almost foolproof. And but it's so vital, and it ties right in with what you talk about with the foundations and building a culture. That being said, what are some of the mistakes that you see leaders make today?
So I mean, the easy ones and probably the bigger ones are going back to awareness, communication, and trust. That can be the theme for the episode. Showing up and just not having the awareness to know when you're doing something wrong, and with that, right, the willingness to admit you're doing something wrong. That no one is going to respect a leader who cannot be self-aware enough to know how they're impacting the organization. And you see it just time and time again. There have been CEOs, right, who have been great CEOs in one company, and then they get hired to go to another company, And again, they run it, they think that their leadership style is what brought on those results. And they show up in that new organization and it just can't take off. And it's like, no matter what they do, it's not working. And it's because they're not ready to change themselves and pull in the situational awareness, the awareness of the team that they have in front of them, and then leverage that in order to get the results. And so that one's huge. On the communication front, right? I mean, we can go back to building clarity and everything, but a lot of times it's even that people don't display their messages in the proper way. One of the exercises I like to give to clients is bridge talk versus tunnel talk, where you would drive across the country, right, to see a bridge. People will go from the East Coast to go see the Golden Gate Bridge, and they're like, "That's amazing."
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of someone looking at a tunnel?
No.
Right. No, it's cool when you're driving in it,
Yeah.
but like the reason we build tunnels is to maintain the landscape.
Yeah.
And so like we're trying to just blend in. And we have with communication, we have those two paths that we can take as well. We can do bridge talk, where it's like we want to be very overt and let people know this is coming from us as a leader, versus tunnel talk, which is really like closed door conversations. And unfortunately, a lot of leaders don't separate these, and they have some of those closed door conversations in front of other people. And so like maybe that team member, they made a bad choice, and maybe it's the second time they make the same bad choice and stuff, and they'll just go off on them in front of the team. It's like that does not help anyone, with the culture in the workplace.
Oh.
Versus like I've actually worked with some leaders who were great at praising their teams, but they would only do it when they were one-on-one. It's like they were embarrassed to call the person out in front of others and say, "Hey, you're doing awesome stuff. Keep it up." And like no one's ever been hurt from a pat on the back, right? Yeah. And so,
yeah.
But that praise and seeing someone else get praise for doing well motivates other people to want to do well as well.
Yes.
And stuff. And so yeah, on the communication side, I think just knowing how I should actually be approaching a situation from a level of like, who needs to hear this message, and what should I make sure that they know comes from me, right? Like policies need to come from me. Any of our company's positioning, the principles that we use to guide ourselves, any of that praise that we were talking about. I was missing one. I call it the 5 Ps. I just dropped one. Processes, positioning. We got them.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, it goes a long way.
Those were awesome. I want to go back though and ask you this.
Mhm.
And important, I think, to get your opinion on this. And I don't know why a lot of leaders don't want to admit when they're wrong or when they made a mistake.
Yeah.
What's been your advice to folk? Because I tend to see that that's within someone's personality also, that they'll tend to kind of be, very rigid in their personal life as well.
Yeah.
How do you unlock that? Like, how do you get leaders to change?
Yeah. So this is a fun one, and it's something you can use in your marketing as well. So I'm going to pass this to everybody.
Yeah.
So, and I'm going to use the marketing story to help get this across. So when someone shows up and they're on social media, they're scrolling, right? They're coming in with their preconceived ideas. And this is the same for a leader, right? They're coming in, they have a view of the world, and everything fits into that worldview. And so there's two things that are going on. They have headwinds and tailwinds. Now, tailwind is when they agree with me. We have a similar thought. And so that tailwind is pushing them towards me, and we can, very quickly get whatever result they need. Then there's also headwinds. And the headwind says they're thinking one way and I'm thinking a different way. And so if I need to get them to see it my way, right, it's going to be very hard to pull them in my direction. We're going to butt heads. No one ever likes being told they're wrong or no. And so if I show up to a leader, right, and I say, "Hey, this is wrong," most of them are going to shut down and say, "No, you're wrong." And that's it.
Right.
So instead, you find ways to tell a story, right? We're not mentioning them in it. We're not doing any of that. We're giving them a parable. We're giving them, any past experience we've had, and we walk them through so that by the end of the story, they've come to their own conclusion that what happened, like what they did, was wrong. And so now we found a way to basically work around that, right? They see it because they've seen it with someone else, and they're like, well, if I see it for that story, my actions actually match up. And they feel different about it because no one went to them and said, "You're wrong." they feel actually pretty good because they came to the conclusion that, hey, I did something wrong here, but I can grow now.
Wow.
And so you do that so whether it's, trying to work through a leader and helping them see that what they're doing is wrong or in your marketing work, which is where I've done this a lot more.
Wow.
It goes a long way. And this is actually a really good skill if you're a mid-level manager, right? Or even a junior employee, if you can find ways to use storytelling to help that leader above you see what they're actually doing within the team, you can actually get, your situation can improve because you're not going to your boss and saying like, hey man, I don't like it when you do this. Instead, you're just telling a story, and they now see how they might be contributing in a similar way that negatively impacts others.
Wow. Chris, that is the best advice that I have heard for getting leaders to kind of get out of that stubbornness of I didn't mess up, you guys messed up, and finger pointing starts. And then that whole culture that you talked about that's so important, goes to waste there. That's awesome to just tell a story. And also if I'm managing other because in my days as a district manager, managing store managers, and as they got successful, the egos also got a little bit successful too. Sometimes, maybe you could have did this. Oh, what do you mean, man? That is great. So I wish I had known that then. That is awesome advice. And this is going to be my last question for you. And I want to make sure I spend, this has been amazing, by the way. I want to make sure I give you plenty of time to talk about how people can connect with you.
Sure.
What other advice do you have for leaders that are just starting out? If you would have talked to yourself 10, 12 years ago, what would be 2 or 3 top skills that you would say you needed to acquire and they need to acquire today?
Yeah. So that's a very good question, and not always an easy one to answer. I would say the first thing I would want to go into organizations building trust as fast as possible. The sooner you can build trust, right, the easier it is to get the team to align around whatever your goals are. And to do that, you need to build predictability. And so a system I like viewing this, I guess, as like if-then statements, right? Where if I'm going to do this, then you can have this. And it's not always something you put into words, but if you start viewing your situations like that, it helps build predictability, because we're creating, a postulate, or I don't even know the math terms for using these statements, but just by thinking about it that way, right? They start getting more confident. If I'm going to bring an idea to my leader, then they're going to accept that idea and they're going to actually think about it. They're not just going to push me away. And so the more often you can get those reps in of showing them like this is the case, it helps build that predictability much faster. So that's one. I feel like I knew this on some like innate level before, but then I was talking to someone and it just became clear. And this is something I wish every leader would know going in, because it will fix every relationship you have. It will help you. I mean, you can negotiate better. You can like everything. And I'm building it up. I'm setting an open loop here. The human brain, right? The amygdala or the basal ganglia. I like using science terms that I should probably study more. You're asking 2 things in that reptile brain all the time. And it's, am I safe and do I matter? And your team is asking that constantly, right? If your team is ever worrying that they're going to get fired, if they're ever worrying that they're not contributing to the team, that's on you as a leader to show up and make sure that they're good, right? When, hey, we're in a recession, right? So there might be some layoffs, things like that. Let me go to my team and make sure that they're confident that we're doing everything we can to keep them, and that the company's going to keep running, right? Like we're helping them feel safe. And then for the do we matter, it's showing them the praise, like showing them how they contribute within a team. Something I used to do in the Army was every week we had to send up a situation report, just an email saying, hey, this is everything we did this week. And I started at the very end of my email up to my battalion commander. I would just include the name of one of my soldiers who did something awesome, and I would share what they did to help the team.
Wow.
And that was it. But then I would CC it to everyone on my team. And it became a competition within my team to see who could get in the commander's email.
Yeah.
And but they loved it, right? It was something super easy for me to do that just showed them, hey, I'm watching. I see what you guys are doing, and I want you to know it matters. You're doing the right things.
Wow. Yeah.
And then I think just to round it out, third piece of advice, be comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
As a leader, you are never going to be in a great situation that's always perfect and everything.
Yeah.
And if you can handle the adversity and just be comfortable knowing that, hey, I'm going to get through this one way or another, we're going to make it work. The sooner you can get used to that, the better, because it's only suffering until you apply meaning to it.
Yeah.
And so once you can do that, doors open. You're good to go.
Only suffering until you can apply meaning to it. Wow. Leaders, that is so many nuggets today, man. There's another one right there. That is awesome. And great advice. Chris, this has been fantastic. Wow. Yeah, you're right, man. I can talk leadership with you for the next 5 hours straight. Not even blink. How can people connect with you and work with you?
Yeah. So best way to connect with me is on LinkedIn, because then we can just start chatting right away. Just Christopher R. Dubois. You'll find me. Or you can go to leadingforeffect.com, and it has everything that we can offer. You can fill out a contact form there if you want us on a podcast, if you want us doing workshops, any coaching, anything like that. We are happy to help. We're happy to talk. We're also, something I'm pushing a lot more to as well, is finding just local organizations, churches, kids clubs. Like, if you know of any of these, if we can help, especially kids, right? If we can help them start developing as leaders now, imagine the world 20 years from now. And so,
no doubt.
yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. We'll make sure all that's out there so people can see it clearly. Chris, thank you so much. First of all, for your time today. Second of all, for your service. God bless you for doing what you've done, and you're still serving the nation, but you're serving in a much deeper way now by helping others and passing on all of these life lessons that you've had, but giving just such fresh advice that I tell you, man, there's at least 10 things I had not heard before that you said today, and leaders, just play this back, and you'll get them. So we need you, man. So keep doing what you're doing, and it is just greatly appreciated. And thank you for joining me today, especially.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure, man. We'll leave it there, folks. So this has been Kenny and Chris. This has been a Leading from the Middle podcast. We'll talk to you real soon.